Hello and welcome to Autosport's Top 50 Drivers of 2024. I'm Kevin Turner and I'm joined in the studio today by Gary Watkins and Haydn Cobb to run through the drivers who made the list. And in this episode, we're going to look at the drivers from 30th place to 21st. Welcome, gents. How are we doing? You all right with getting through the list so far?
Oh, good.
Not too furious, Gary? Anyone left on your list to upset?
Oh well, I'm sure someone will.
I mean, we're not even halfway
upset.
through, so
Yes,
I'm sure you can find someone. So so let's get on to it then. So in 30th place, Dries Van Tor, another one of your drivers. Gary, give us a bit of a rundown as to why you reckon he's made the list this time.
Well, just an outstanding season from where I was sitting, but bizarrely, when I spoke to him for the Autosport Top 50, he said, not such a good season. And I said, really? This is a guy who came into prototype racing properly. He'd just done a handful of races previously with BMW, with the WRT LMDH in WEC, and was the star driver in that lineup. And that's saying something, because it's got Robin Friens, Rene Rast, Sheldon van der Linde, Marco Wittmann, some like proper pucker drivers. And
It's a pretty amazing lineup,
yeah,
actually, isn't it?
and this guy who has no prototype experience, just did 1 or 2 seasons of single-seaters before going to GTs, so no big downforce experience, was the star driver. Now, we've seen that before, haven't we? GT drivers excelling in the new breed of prototype because they're heavier cars, they're not... they don't have the same level of downforce as an LMP1, so they are closer to...
Has that
GT
made the step
cars.
easier, really, to get into the top level of sports car
but
racing? Still impressive.
Still impressive. And at the same time, he was impressing at the wheel of GT3 BMW M4. He still had a big program of events there. In fact, he did 26 or 27 races. He did a GT World Challenge, a full GT... I've got to say it properly, GT World Challenge Europe campaign. Didn't win a Sprint Cup title this year, because he's won that. He seems to win it every year, but he didn't win it this
times?
year. I think he's won it. I think it's now 3 years in 5. He did have 3 years in 4 before this year. He was second this year. He might have won the overall crown. He was pretty close to that. But for a technical issue at the final round in Jeddah, I think they would have potentially have won that. And when I say technical issue, it was actually caused by some debris in the radiator, putting the engine into a sort of slightly safe mode. But he was outstanding. They might have won a race. They were they were ultra competitive, BMW at Fuji. He also pulled out a lap to put it on provisional pole. Is that actually not the right word? But he was fastest in first qualifying on Wednesday at Le Mans. Pulled out a lap that we thought, oh, blimey. He had a super strong season. So I told him, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "Yeah, well, I know the performance
high standards was clearly.
The
Yeah.
performance
I quite like
was
that.
there.
That's good, isn't it?
But yeah, he did like. You'll have to go on Autosport.com or buy Autosport magazine to find out if it was 26 or 27 races. Because
26.
It's 26. You remember? Yeah. Okay. So but
still go and look at Autosport.com or buy the magazine anyway.
Yeah, there's way more in there than that. Yeah.
Which is a lot of racing. And he said, I enjoyed it. And he says, but probably it's not quite the sweet spot. That would be like 18 races. But he did do a British GT one-off at Silverstone. He goes, I really enjoyed it. And I said, have you ever raced at Donington and Alton? He goes, no, I've never done those. But if someone asked me, I'd really like to do them. And I thought, good on you. Just wants to tick off some of those classic British circuits.
Yeah, we need to talk to him more, I think. I mean, actually, you're making me wonder, as we're the next two on the list, in 29 we've got Mickey Jensen and 28 Sebastian Buemi. Should we have used these GT3 encounters and outings to actually bump him ahead of his WEC?
It's too late now.
Well, I think there's an argument actually that he is too low. Actually, yes.
Damn.
Because I think we didn't factor them in enough. So And I think he deserves a few more points for enthusiasm. Now, I was going to offer him a drive in my Golf at Cadwell Park, because he'll never race a GT3 car at Cadwell Park. So if he was still an Audi driver, he could probably race my Golf. But now he's a BMW driver, he wouldn't be able to.
So
We'll have to borrow your compact road car instead.
Yeah. Put a cage in that. Yeah.
It's true. Well, he's got the opposite problem of some of the rally drivers we've mentioned about. He's got too much on his programme, which is going to help him here because he's excelled in almost everything he's done.
And it was interesting. He was saying, seat time is valuable, and he does say that doing multiple programs and in two different kinds of cars, it's tough at first, but you learn how to do it and you take things back and forth with you, so it does make you a better driver. And I've spoken to lots of people over time about this. Nicky Katzberg, a few years ago, who was doing a front-wheel drive program, doing touring in tin top racing, and people said to him, you mustn't go to front-wheel drive, it will upset you for when you go back into a proper car. But he says no, it was a valuable experience. And I remember, like, sort of going back a bit further, Emmanuel Collard, who was the king of swapping between cars. I think at one point he was racing a Pescarolo LMP1 car. He had a program of races in a GT2 car with Porsche and was also racing a GT1 Corvette. And he was just a seamless transition. And I thought, that's a sign of a proper racer, but it must make you better.
Yeah, you would think so. I remember asking Nick Tandy about this once. He said, I was just finding the limit of the tyre in any car you're in anyway. Tyre and grip. As I'm sure it's more complicated than that. It might seem simple if you're doing it all the time.
Well, a car is a car.
Yeah, and obviously the tyres are the contact patch, so I kind of see where he's coming from. But we should talk about Jensen then, who's 29th in the list, and Buemi, I suppose, because our Formula E correspondent Stefan Mackley was quite keen to get Buemi keep dropping in positions because of how unimpressive he was in Formula E.
It was not in a frontline car.
No, but also didn't the whole teammate comparison not so brilliant as well.
Yeah.
But
it looks like he's sort of he's not a frontliner in Formula E that he was. Can he turn it around in the future? But that's a big question. But he is still a top performer in WEC with Toyota.
He's one of our most consistent drivers in the top 50.
Yes.
He's there. He's been there year in, year out.
I think from my world, he's probably been there every year. I wouldn't think there's too many years since the rebirth of the modern WEC in 12. I don't think there are many years when he wouldn't have made it. Partly also based on his Formula E.
3 or 4 years ago, I did the first 20 years of the Autosport Top 50 and did a big count and worked it all out. Did
you have an overall?
I had an overall. And Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso were so close.
Really? Yeah.
I mean, obviously Hamilton would have, over the last couple of years, moved significantly ahead, I would think, and obviously Verstappen's still coming from a lower point. So maybe I should do it again for the 75th anniversary of Autosport next year, or maybe when we get to 25 editions of the top 50, I'll get the Excel sheet out. But Buemi will feature quite well because he's been a consistent scorer in our top 50 over the years. But somebody who hasn't been, because he's much newer on the scene, is Mikkel Jensen. So tell us about his. Why did he impress you this year, Gary?
Well, I suppose first and foremost because he was the standout Peugeot driver, and look at the names.
Good lineup again.
And secondly, because I enjoy watching him at the wheel of a racing car because he makes things happen, and you think,
that's what you want on the grid, isn't it? You want someone to do that.
I mean, there were some charges at the end of the season, at the end of the Fuji and Bahrain races, and he had the right tyres under him. Peugeot, perhaps in a bit of desperation to get a result, rolled the dice both times, counting on there being some safety cars. Fuji, where we kind of expect them, they got them, and he got a four. He came through to fourth place in the best of the 908 Peugeots. So I'm going to say that again. The 908 Peugeot. Yeah. Now, if he'd been in a 908, I think he would have done even better. 9X8. Peugeots. And then they did the same at Bahrain, a place where you don't normally expect safety cars, but they did get safety cars, and they ended up finishing fourth again, but with an exclusion of the 51 Ferrari. They actually got their first podium of the season, and yeah, both times he was really good. But I'm going to go all the way back to Qatar and the first race of the year when he was racing the original 9X8 before they got the updated car with a rear wing at Imola round 2, and he was exceptional at Qatar again. And for me, the only driver in that lineup who held a candle to him was Nico Müller, actually. So yeah, an impressive season for a guy, without much of a single-seater background, who's made it in P2, coming up through LMP3, LMP2, and done, and sort of arrived at the top of the tree. Well, with a manufacturer who's not at the top of the tree, but you know what I mean. And if he has a winning car under him, he's going to win races.
So let's get on to 28, which is Bohemian. Unless Haydn, did you
I was just saying,
jump in there?
The three we've sort of grouped together here: Van Thorp, Jensen, and Bohemian.
Are they? Is this coincidence, or are they grouped together for a reason?
No, but I think the way you've sort of there's different angles into each of them, and that's where I guess they've just somehow accidentally gravitated to each other, because you mentioned a little bit earlier maybe Van Thorp was a bit low, and then maybe Bohemian's sort of a bit high. You swap it there, but
no, I didn't say Bohemian's a bit high. Someone else said.
True, but in terms of bringing it all together, that's where this comparison comes in, and it's incredibly fine margins, you could say.
Absolutely,
because there's so many factors and variables. Using these three as a good example of where they come together.
So how much of Bohemia being in 28th, and was he 4th in your hypercar list?
I think so, yeah.
Was down to that the special drivers, the special drivers do special things, which I think is a phrase you coined a few years ago, which has been very useful guiding principle as one of the things we look at in these for this list of basically snatching manufacturer's title for Toyota away from Porsche at the finale. How much did that? I mean, that's a big moment, isn't it?
It was a big moment. 90 minutes to go. He's down in 10th place. Toyota need to win the race to take the manufacturer's title. He comes through and does it. An amazing performance. Again, he had the right tyres. Toyota had played the long game with that car, and they'd sort of taken a bit of pain. Or actually, Brendan Hartley took most of the pain, sort of not being on great tyres, and it looked like that car was out of the mix. And because the sister car had gone out with a fuel pump issue, it looked like Toyota were out of the game. And then suddenly, Buemi produces this amazing performance, overtaking cars left, right and centre, gets through, takes the lead actually from Matt Campbell, another driver we were talking about a little bit earlier. But not only that, then disappears into the distance and wins by, it was 30 seconds at the end, give or take.
What you said there, though, is another reason why it's so difficult to do the endurance racing, because obviously Brendan Hartley did his bit by running around on the older rubber, and that's on the averages that would look bad. He's actually done an important job to contribute to the result, and that's where it gets really tricky.
And that is, it's very difficult to make comparisons because we as journalists don't have the full information of what tyres people are running. There'll be two different, we call them compounds, but they're not actually officially called compounds by Michelin, but two different specs of tyres. We don't know who is on what. Occasionally we get the information on the telly, on the graphics, but it's quite often wrong. And I actually have asked that Michelin make this information available to us, and they did have a means to make it available at Le Mans in their hospitality, which was a single iPad, and the system kept crashing, unfortunately, so that wasn't great. But it is hard to make judgments, but when you see someone doing special things to create a special result, then they have to go in the top, in my top 10 and in the top 50. But then going beyond that, Buemi did have a strong season. You know, I think he drove just as well as when he won the championship. You know, he was champion with his teammates for the previous 2 years, and he was outstanding at Le Mans this year. And of course, that car, I mean, I don't want to say it was somehow the moral winner at Le Mans, but you know, it would have, should have won Le Mans had not Hartley been assaulted at Mulsanne corner by assaulted is actually the wrong word, by Alessandro Pierguidi in the Ferrari, but you know, biffed, and you know, tapped into a half spin, you know, sort of having to wait because it was just after a safety car, having to wait for the queue to go to, you know, a pack of traffic to go back, you know, lost a lot of time. I think we can say that they would have won but for that.
Fair enough. So let's move on to 27. And then we could do an entire podcast on this person because this. But we're not going to. Let's try. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So at 27 is Lewis Hamilton. Is the
okay. We're on to Lewis Hamilton. Is he too high or is he too low?
Well, that's what we're here for.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would have said, you know, you can make both arguments, can't you?
Certainly.
So.
But is it the lowest he's been on?
So definitely since he's been in F1.
Yes.
And I think you'd have to say it probably is his weakest F1 season, but he did deliver the British Grand Prix victory in difficult circumstances and looked after those soft tyres when, let's face it, Max Verstappen suddenly went from not really being in it to, oh my God, he's going to win this race. Had it been anyone other than Hamilton in the lead Mercedes, it's another win for Verstappen. He was brilliant at Spa as well. Okay, so he got done by the George Russell one-stop strategy, which then got undone because he was underweight. So there were peaks, but there were also some lower lows than you would normally expect from Hamilton. I mean, throwing off on the second lap at Austin. I mean, I struggle to think of the number of times other times where Hamilton has gone off and caused his own retirement in a Grand Prix. So,
yeah,
and then you know the qualifying deficit.
Certainly, when you compare it to his previous years and what he's been able to achieve.
You know, a guy with how many poles has he got?
104
poles, 105 wins.
Yeah.
I think for me it was the Las Vegas one that really sort of summed it up because he was quick all weekend, including in the race. He was actually quicker than George Russell in the race, I think. But he gave himself too much work to do by having a really messy qualifying session and coming from 10th.
Yeah,
so it was a great race to second, but had he been starting like Lewis Hamilton of 3, 4, 5 years ago, sticks it on the front row, gets the lead, goodbye. And I don't think Russell or anyone else beats him, but he opened the door to things.
Yeah, Abu Dhabi was a similar situation of giving himself too much to not that he was in a fight for the win there, but yeah.
Has the peak pace gone?
He says so, doesn't he?
Yeah, there's that edge is.
There were some telling comments from him at the end of the year, weren't there?
Yeah, you take him on his word. You think he's been very honest and very sort of almost brutal on himself.
Yeah.
But particularly in that car in this era, and Russell was sort of growing.
Yeah,
he's found it tough going, and that's shown consistently. We said earlier we were talking about comparing teammates, this and that. Those two are great comparisons in that car, and it really does show how fine margins can be with that tyre prep when it comes to the quali laps and how much you get it off just a little bit wrong, and it has big consequences. And I think definitely like Vegas or other occasions for Hamilton this year, seen that lots this year, and then. Yeah, you throw a couple of errors in there that you've referenced to before. It's been a difficult year, and if you add in sort of a narrative aspect of he's already said goodbye to Mercedes at the start of the year and just had this long goodbye, and how much
that's not good, is it? I don't think
it's not going to help a mindset really
for anyone.
And either side.
Yeah. And I do believe that everyone did want to finish. Like you could see that the Mercedes team was pretty happy with Hamilton's final race in Abu Dhabi because it was a fighting, feisty coming through. Yeah, and his move on. If I'd been George Russell, I'd step out of the way and go, there you go, this. You know, last Mercedes drive, but not hang around enough to get done around the outside on the last lap of a high-speed corner.
Right.
I think I probably would have let
an
it go
extra level of shine that he didn't need. But
exactly. So, I mean, obviously, you know, this isn't going to get any easier going up against who I believe is the fastest qualifier in Formula One next year with Charles Leclerc. But I still think we've seen enough from Hamilton that in the races he'll still be able to show everyone a thing or two. If the car's competitive, I think he'll be on it.
Yeah, and there's that an element to it is, yes, he when the car was particularly in colder conditions, but played to Mercedes' advantages, yeah, he got those wins, got those podiums, and starred on those days. But not on the days that the car wasn't competitive to a victory fight. A bit like the Alonso thing. There was a case of, you could see,
or not like the Alonso thing, as I'm arguing.
True. But you could see that sort of step back a little bit, whereas Russell seemed to just keep pushing.
I was going to say, to be fair to Hamilton, like, Alonso can be off it and he's still ahead of Lance Stroll. Hamilton's off
Right,
it.
yeah,
He's
okay,
not,
yeah.
George
Yeah,
George Russell's going to expose that because he's good enough.
Yeah.
Right, well, let's move on to the next one. Right, so number 26, another one from your world,
Yes.
Felipe Nasr, the other driver that made the difference at the Daytona 24 Hours, won the IMSA title. I mean, he was nailed on entry for the list, surely.
Well, I should think so, yeah. And I know that Jeremy rated his performances this year, and the
Jeremy
race.
Shaw now.
Jeremy Shaw, yes.
50 years writing full sport on and off, by the way.
Yeah,
apparently.
amazing, isn't it?
Incredible, yeah. So thank you, Jeremy.
Yeah. And from where I was sitting at Daytona, again, he was a class act. So, yes, I think he deserves to be there. I'd love to see him in the WEC because I think he's just a top-line driver. Yeah, we'll see him, I'm sure, next year in the third car at Le Mans, presuming they do that.
I hope they do, but can they do something a bit more interesting with the livery? Come on, do something cool and retro. Like they did with the 911 GT3 a few
they
years
did the
ago.
Rothmans
They did
car,
Rothmans, the
PK.
PK. Come on,
I mean,
really
that
hit
was-
us with something cool.
That was the ultimate, yeah.
I like the old Shell livery, the 96288
do
Shell
you?
livery. That's quite
Okay.
cool, yeah.
I mean, I do love it when manufacturers, well, normally it's Porsche.
It is
isn't
normally Porsche,
yeah.
who do
Yeah.
this thing. But Ford did it one year with the GT program, didn't they? Should have done it from the outset, actually, not waited for the final year, I think. But anyway, I would just back up what Jeremy has said about him. Just a top liner who performs.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's an awful lot more.
No.
So we know that he's quality, don't we? And he showed it and won a title this year and a big race. So
Yes.
we'll move straight on to 25. Willpower, fourth in our IndyCar list, I think.
Yeah,
So Haydn, it was one of those seasons where he wasn't. It's kind of strange, isn't it? For a long time in his career, he was the quick guy that couldn't win a championship. And then he kind of got that off his back, and actually his second title was a nice, accomplished season. And then since then, it's been a bit again.
A little bit.
Technical term.
Yeah. Ooh, yeah. Yes, a little bit like that. And you could certainly say his teammates probably overshadowed him at various points this season, but he arguably had the consistency to be the middle of the trio in my
Consistently in the middle.
opinion. Yeah. So it's hard to sort of judge his peaks, weren't
Am I
quite there.
right in saying that he was one of the three Penske drivers that didn't hit the push to pass
He is-
on the restart?
that's
because
right.
He knew it was
He knew
illegal.
you could say he knew the rules.
Can we
knew the
bump him
rules.
up a few places?
Just
then?
for the honesty, we do like
honesty,
that. Well,
honesty.
he's made it to the top 25.
Yeah,
And
halfway.
just going back to consistent performers in the top 50, be interesting to see how he does. Probably him and Scott Dixon, are going to be the two top IndyCar.
That's not
Oh,
Scott
Scott
way back at the
Dixon.
start.
Yeah, so when I did the sort of 20 years thing, Scott Dixon was, along with the two Sebs, Ogier and Loeb, the highest scoring non-F1
Oh, really?
drivers. Yeah.
We didn't mention him earlier, but yeah. Not
Who, Dixon
Dixon?
didn't make the list.
No, it was
No.
one of my
Similar thing to Newgarden,
Forgotten, really.
sixth in the IndyCar list, and did win Petit Le Mans.
Yeah.
But similarly, not the
not
guy
Big
that
Guy's
did it.
teammate, yeah.
Which is a brilliant segue into number 24.
Well,
completely unscripted, by the way. That was a complete
Yes.
flick. Renger van der Zande, we know that he's been a good driver for years. I think he gets on this list because he drove past my mate Nick Tandy to win Petit Le Mans. I haven't seen Nick since then. Obviously, you're going to rib him massively about that. When he gets in. How he's let that happen is unbelievable. So yeah, fair play to van der Zande there.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is on Jeremy's recommendation. An amazing move there at Road Atlanta at Petit Le Mans to win the race, on the back of a strong season. Maybe I'll go back to my Oscar analogy. It's fresh in the mind.
did it at the right time.
But you know, is a sort of racer's racer, Renger. Can pull off the moves. And I actually know that Jeremy is a very big fan of his.
He's probably one of those people that could have been in the top 50 more often because he's been a solid performer, but has not.
Solid but unspectacular in previous years, and maybe he's had that.
You needed that special moment, yeah.
But you know, there's a gap in his career when he basically he didn't do anything. He effectively retired, but then he went to selling insurance in the paddock, and one of the people he was selling insurance to had a Formula Le Mans car, the Orica FLM 09, the Flem, as we like to call it. And he ended
like
up
to call it that. I'm a fan.
He ended up doing a few races in that, and that relaunched his career. He was sort of an ex-driver. In his mind, he was an ex-driver, you know. And, you know, he's relaunched himself and, has had a phenomenal career since. It's not quite the Richard Westbrook story of a guy doing nothing for 5 and a bit years. But, it is quite an interesting story.
The drivers, they call them sabbaticals now, not retirements, which, if I'm going to steal this segue, goes into a driver on 23rd that did have a sort of sabbatical and has come back and is rising up the ranks again.
Go on then, carry on.
Nico Hulkenberg. There you go, covered that off.
You can carry on doing my job, that's fine.
Yeah, we're just a really phenomenal job, I would say, and for Haas, and like I said, come back in to Formula One in the last couple of years. He's on his way to basically what looks like lead the Audi project for the future.
When that was announced, I was thinking, really? You know, I just think, that's his mates with Andreas Seidel. But then if you look at his performances, I
would agree with that sense that when I saw where he was being pushed to when we were putting the list together, I did raise an eyebrow. But then you look, I guess, a little closer. Yeah.
Well, it's you know, in April, when it was announced that he'd be an Audi driver, we were surprised at that. And he did have a strong start to the season, but this was April. We probably wouldn't have been saying that Nico Hulkenberg would have been 23rd in the list.
That's probably fair, but I am going to engage smug mode at this point, because I remember when he came back, and a lot of people in the office were a bit, oh, really? And I was like, but I think he's quality. He's a quality driver. Like, his record in the junior single-seaters was in the same sort of ballpark as some of the top drivers we've talked about. He's often not had the kit, but he's usually compared pretty well to teammates. He's not quite the absolute top draw, but I think he's better than his results suggest. He's absolutely blown Kevin Magnussen into the weeds most of this season.
Well, I came back from Sepang in when he sort of burst onto the A1 GP season, and I said, there's this guy called Nico Hulkenberg. He's absolutely outstanding. And if you'd have asked me then that he'd got to where he is now without having won a Grand Prix, or
not even a podium.
Not having a podium.
I think maybe that's the thing.
I would have laughed you out of town.
Yeah,
you know,
that's the thing that
guy
probably overhangs this whole reason of no one was quite sure, or his return was not given so much love, because he's just got this unwanted record attached to him that he cannot shake off.
Oh, he's easily the best Formula One driver in history without a podium.
Oh yeah,
surely.
To have done any kind of amount of Grand Prix.
Minimum 20 starts, whatever.
But the irony is, well, that's not irony. We can probably predict that he will finish his career without a podium, because Audi
you just want one crazy race.
Audi are not going to be in a position
scratching from that record. I bet he wants that too, more than anything. But even if he won't admit it, but consistently and outperforming the machinery that he's had this year is definitely warranted his place.
Where does this? How do we view Magnussen now?
Well, to be fair, he had that problem with. Was it the brakes?
Brakes, yes.
Yeah, so when they tweaked the brakes, he did actually finish the season quite well, didn't he?
Yeah.
So he probably looked worse than he actually is.
Yeah.
And of course, he's now another one that's stepping into your
step back return. Yeah.
Because a couple of years ago, he sat in front of me and said how he was finished with Formula One, and he was a new chapter of his career opening in Sportscars.
You can say it all over again.
So I'll say I don't need to interview you now. I'll just
Don't feel
Find
hurt,
it
Gary.
out.
I think most drivers would have done what he did given the opportunity, I think.
Well, a really interesting thing, years ago when Kevin was coming up through the ranks, maybe it was in 3.5, well, of course he, looked really strong, didn't he? And I was talking to his dad, and I was just sort of casually chatting, and he goes, the difference between me and Kevin is that I loved being a racing driver, and I was just so enthusiastic to race anything, and I saw Jan Magnussen race like a shitty, so I'm not allowed to say that, am I? A bit of a not very competitive Peugeot whatever in the World Touring Car Championship, and he said the difference between me and Kevin is that he is dead focused on being a Formula 1 driver, and he said I never had that. Which I thought was really interesting.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
Like, I interviewed him when he was 16 and he came to the Formula 4 festival in Aquila.
Yes.
And he was, that sounds cliche, doesn't it? But you can just sort of tell like they're that much more mature and focused than most of the people the same age. And you think, he's probably, I'm not going to pretend that I would have said, he's going to be a Formula 1 driver, but you could tell he was going to get somewhere.
Yeah, certainly.
So, right, well, he's not on the 50. We've just spent some time talking about someone not in the 50. Someone who is in the 50, number 22, Will Brown. He is our Australian Supercars representative, as Brock Feeney didn't make it, as we discussed previously. Just a really impressive season for Triple Eight, really.
Big time, jumping into that car, putting the results in almost immediately. Seems like this new era of supercars is a little bit like the Formula 2 situation we just talked about there, suiting the young guys a little bit more.
That's overcoming the lack of experience with the previous generation of cars, and also, the previous generation of cars. I've talked to drivers who drove them, and they sort of scratching their heads about how to get the speed.
Very tricksy.
And saying you're as a newcomer or going in for one of the Duros or whatever, you're not just going to get in that car and.
I really miss those cars, though. They were like
mega,
big, proper. These feel a bit like GT3 Plus cars. Like they're just GT cars, aren't they?
Yeah, really.
It's not really even a touring car. I mean, it's not called a touring car championship anyway.
No.
But it just like a Mustang.
Is touring car racing dead?
Whoa, that's a whole other.
No, I don't think we can go.
TCR. Well, it is touring cars, but they're hatchbacks. Like touring cars should have boots, as far as.
Well, Jake Hill's British touring car winning WSR BMW has a boot. That's
true.
But it's also got the driven wheels in the right place. Damn, I thought I'd get through a top 50 without mentioning that this time. But Will Brown's driven wheels are definitely in the right place. But he was actually really good at turning, as we often say with championship winners, turning the bad weekends into decent point scores. Like quite a few drivers can rock up and when the car's good, bang in the first and seconds. But he was good at grinding out those fourths or grabbing a podium when other people were on it. So a very worthy champion in a series that is a high level, whatever we say about it. It's just
again, going back over the 20 plus years of the top 50, it'd be interesting to see how many times the supercar or the Aussie V8 champion has made the cut. Or somebody was at the show.
High ratio,
most years,
because I reckon most all sport staffers have got a bit of a soft spot for Aussie supercars. I think
because you know how competitive it is.
Exactly, and it's hard not to like a big, loud, leery rear-wheel drive V8, isn't it? Let's be honest.
We're sheltered from that world here.
I'd like to see them over here.
Yeah.
But a non-championship race in the UK would be quite an expensive endeavour for them to do. So someone would have to stump up some serious cash.
Yes.
Right. Well, let's finish this section at number 21. The last person that didn't make the 20, Pierre Gasly. Fantastic season, really, especially at the back end where he really seemed to be banging in those results, and he did get the better of Esteban Ocon in the end, when actually for the first part of the season they were very evenly matched. They were the closest teammates in qualifying, within a few thousandths on the averages, but then the last few races he really pulled away, delivered it, and he kind of secured that. I know Brazil obviously got Alpine up into the 6th place, but he really was the one that delivered it over the last couple of rounds.
It was those sort of last couple of results after Brazil that just cemented it, that ticked off the points. Qualified, was it 3rd in Vegas? And I know they didn't get the reward they wanted to with the engine issue.
Not his fault, obviously.
A hole in the side of the car and all this. But recency bias may come into it, but as Kev said, Ocon and Gasly were incredibly close to start with. maybe you could say the internal politics at Alpine. I am speculating here. Don't come for me. In terms of where preferences and priorities would have gone, knowing that Ocon was going out the door to the point where he wasn't even allowed to drive for the last race of the year, and they put Doohan in. But overall, Gasly did produce when required.
I would also argue that them putting Doohan in showed how much faith and confidence they had in Gasly to deliver the result.
Yeah, it was a risk.
Because Haas were quick, Hulkenberg was there,
Yeah.
and actually Gasly jumped Hulkenberg in the Drivers' Championship with that last round as well.
Yeah.
So I think they're 2 outs. And actually it's nice, isn't it? Because it's Gasly returning to that form that we saw for a while at whatever it was called at the time, now RB, I think it's probably Alpha Tauri. And
can we just call it
Toro,
Minardi?
that,
Let's just keep
no, we
it
can't
simple.
call it Minardi.
If they change their name again, I'm never going to call them by anything else other than Minardi.
It's a good thing you're not right too much about them. That would create confusion.
Isn't it interesting that Alpine came and snatched 6th in F1, where you'd have said, a few races in when it became apparent.
Well, they qualified on the back row, the two of them,
Yeah.
first round.
Yeah.
And then if you look at WEC, they came through to snatch 4th in the manufacturers' points, which again, you wouldn't have predicted. Okay, they did have quite a good first race on strategy, Qatar, but they certainly weren't in the mix. Both cars out before 6 hours at Le Mans, and they came through to take 4th.
I would argue that I think that they've got some very good people who know how to run racing and engineers, and it's been the senior management side of things that's been the problem, certainly on the F1 side. I mean, obviously they've hopefully now solved that and are moving on.
Yeah,
I think
bringing Flav back.
It's not a surprise that the people there know what they're doing. They're good people, aren't they?
Yes.
Which seems like quite a nice way to finish this this third part of our top 50 drives of 2024. We'll be back soon with our rundown from 20 to 11th. If you missed them, you can catch our previous episodes on our channel. There's a link in the description below. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be back soon with the next episode.